There we go.
Hi, guys.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. How about yourselves?
Good, good.
Like Jackie Mason, who doesn't like soup, right?
That's right.
All right. How are the kids doing?
Good, thank God. And yours?
Doing well. We're going to see Melissa and the grandchildren over Shabbos, and we're going to, and then the others are coming as well. Stephen and Jordan will be there too. So yeah, so it'll be nice. Grandchildren have a early birthday party.
Oh,
Good.
How old?
So they'll be in December. Mitzvah Shem, 4 years old.
oh my.
Wow, nice.
So they're having it right. So Terry and I are going away for Pesach,
Where?
and we're going to a hotel in Orlando
Mhm.
that Jay Weitzman and his mother used to go to, and he can't go because if Pesach is during tax season,
Oh, he's busy.
he's too busy. But one of the speakers is Jordan Gorfinkel.
Oh, nice.
Really?
Isn't that? And Terry and I, but mostly Terry, was in the hospital in Florida, and he and Dr. Gorfinkel's father was the chaplain in the hospital,
Oh my.
and then Terry worked for Joel, for Dr. Gorfinkel. Yeah, right. So
A good time.
We'll get started in
Yeah.
1 more minute, okay? 1 more minute.
1 minute.
okay, I'm gonna mute.
Good evening, everybody. We're gonna get ourselves started. Thank you, everybody, for signing in. It is possible that we will go back at some point briefly to the whiskey debate on a very specific issue. Not sure if we're gonna do it or not still. It's a little bit of a dry issue. Interesting, but it's a Taroves issue, and it's a little bit not sure. Either way, for now, we're taking a break from that conversation, and I dug into my archives, and I found something that I had put together, again, based off of a slew of shiurim from Rabbi Torchiner. Rabbi Mordechai Torchiner, again, is the Rosh Kollel in Toronto, and one of the things that I've mentioned before about Rabbi Torchiner that I love is that he, whenever he has a shiur on YU Torah, or anywhere, honestly, he posts his source sheet, which makes it much easier to find and to reproduce many of his makoros. So I owe a debt of gratitude to Rabbi Torchiner for much of tonight's shiur. Another thing is that, again, these types of topics, I think you could kind of get into a tailspin in terms of how many different details you touch on. And so for the sake of tonight, at the very least, my goal is to paint broad brushstrokes, just to kind of give a sense of how we think about some of these things. And part of the reason I decided to go with this topic is for those who are part of my Tuesday and Thursday afternoon class, we just got up to the Midah of Hanifa, which is flattery. And so I thought that dealing with some of these halachot in the context of business ethics would jive and dovetail very nicely with that earlier shir. You don't need to be in that shir to be in this shir. You don't need this shir to be in that shir. But I thought that would be a nice way to look at the same issue, sort of from a halachic lens versus a more hashkafic lens. Additionally, and this is partially because Rabbi Trachiner himself drew so heavily from his works. So there was a sefer, an English sefer put out called Moral Issues of the Marketplace in Jewish Law by Rabbi Dr. Aaron Levine, where he uses case studies that he kind of creates the cases, but allows him to discuss a lot of issues. And we'll be drawing a decent amount from that text, particularly as well. So with no further ado, I will bring up the source sheet. I will say, compared to many of our other classes, my goal for this class is to be a little bit more interactive. Again, over Zoom, it's a little bit hard. So as best as possible, if you can unmute and remute yourself when you want to type in, but we'll do our best. For tonight's class, I want to deal with a couple of issues, mainly issues of bargaining, issues of how you maybe praise somebody in a certain way that you're trying to get something out of them, and try to create at least a framework for how we think about some of these things in the context of shopping, business ethics, going to a yard sale, going to an antique shop, whatever it is where you find it. The reality is, right, that today, other than my parents, who find a way to negotiate everywhere, right? Even a normal store where there seems to be like, oh, this is the price, you can buy it or you can leave it. Somehow my parents still seem to get into negotiations with people, even in those places. Most people, most of us, don't necessarily come across negotiating circumstances too often, with the exception of major purchases, right? So if you're buying a house, right? So there's a certain expectation of there being a back and forth, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I wanted to start off with a case back from 2015. This case was a true story. Some of the stories, again, in Rabbi Levine's book are actually fictional stories, but this is a true story. Jeff Gillian was a garage sale, went to a garage sale treasure. He's a local bargain hunter, and he bought a dolly, and this is the kind of the short version. So how's this for a return on your investment? Spend $5 at a Henderson garage sale and walk away with a piece of art worth thousands. Not last Saturday, the Saturday before, says Dave Shaw, telling News 3 about the neighborhood sale he visited late in the afternoon. Shaw is a treasure hunter, for lack of a better term. He buys and sells stuff on eBay, enlisting the help of his wife, who also helps with research. But back to that one Saturday in Henderson, he had quite a lot of good stuff there. A lot of it was expensive, Shaw said. And then I looked to my left and saw a painting and picked it up and said, "How much is this?" And he, the person who was putting on the sale, said $10. And I said, "Well, I have 5." And he said, "Okay." And he took the painting for $5. What he walked away with, he later found out, was the original 1977 print of Salvador Dali titled Reflection. Shaw is not an art novice, meaning he has some expertise in the art world, and he has an eye for things like this. He suspected that this could be the real deal, so he called friends. We put him in contact with friends in the art world. He called an expert in Washington State. The rest is history. He ends up selling the painting for thousands of dollars after buying it for $5. So what do you say? Is this an ethical thing to do? Not an ethical thing to do? What do you guys think?
I mean, that's sort of a straightforward kind of purchase, it would seem. I mean, the expectation is that there is bargaining going on at like a yard sale, and that I don't, even though he had some idea that there was some value there. Other people, I mean, you see things on the Antique Roadshow, and and people have gotten things and they had just gotten them and had gotten them at a good price, and then find out that there's something special. In this
Right.
case, the guy had some concept that there could be a potential there, although it was not a surety.
No, it was not a surety, right? It could have been just some nice copy.
Right. And so he offhand, I don't see a difficulty on that.
Okay. That's fair. Anybody else have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll weigh in. So I think there's a couple things. One is it feels a little bit different than like finding money in a mattress, because that would be something that's hidden and the person selling it had no idea that there was money there. This you can actually see the painting. Yeah, you didn't know
See the
whole thing.
painting, right? Right, 100%.
You didn't have this full value, but I think the other thing is selling art, like getting art like a praise that it's actually that famous painter, whoever it takes, like not the average Joe can figure that out. It takes someone with like a lot of skill in art to solve that. And it also like takes connections. Like I think you have to know people in the art world to even know who to ask if it's a real, whatever. So like just even buying the person that sold it probably couldn't have actually found out it was such an expensive painting. Took like
So first of all, right, you have to have connections to Sotheby's or some sort of program place that could actually appraise it properly and whatnot. Also, as you said, this was right completely above board. Like, meaning the guy could have done the research. He could have tried to figure it out. It wasn't like it wasn't like you peeled back the art and behind the art was a Van Gogh, right? This was the piece of art. He could have looked up, who this person was. He could have not. He could have tried to figure it out. He chose not to. Okay, all very valid points.
Well, and maybe he also bought it at a sale himself. I mean, that it wasn't necessarily something that came down through his family. It wasn't that, so maybe he was just buying things and reselling them. Again, we don't, that's something we don't know. But but still, in that case, that would seem to open it up even more.
Good. So I think these are a lot of very good points. Let's go back and move on, and we'll pick up some pointers as we go. Okie doke. So back in the source sheet. So a slightly different case, and this one comes from Rabbi Levine's book. So the case here, I have a short version of it, but there is a little longer version of this case. And this is a fictitious story that he makes up, but apparently in this fictitious story, there is a group of professors who are being represented by Professor Weinman, and they are trying to they kind of have a union type of a situation where they're trying to get raises for the professors. And this Professor Pelt, or whoever this Pelt fellow is representing the college, and the college doesn't want to raise the professors' wages. They actually want to cut them back, because they cry poverty, even though the professors say, well, you did printed that you got this grant and that grant and this grant and that grant. So how is it that your guys don't have any money? And so they're having this conversation back and forth. At the end of the kind of the presentation where they're arguing back and forth, so not wanting to end his response to the union's demands on a sour note, Pelt, who's representing the college, ended his presentation with a quip. Looking at Wyman with a mischievous twinkle in his eye, Pelt said, "Professor Wyman, you're trying to extend your famous law of household consumption to new frontiers." So here, what, again, the way that Rabbi Levine presents this is that this, again, fictitious story with a fictitious reality here, right, is based off of apparently this Professor Wyman had written some essay. And so Pelt, in terms of trying to build a rapport with Professor Wyman, even as they're debating, brings up, right, the fact that that he had clearly done his research. He'd read up on who Professor Wyman was and what some of his works were, and so he's kind of referencing one of the works of Professor Wyman in terms of a way to show Professor Wyman that he takes him seriously, even while he's arguing on behalf of the college, doesn't want to raise the wages of the college. And so this is what you might call extraneous information, but also a little bit of right. So what do you think? Meaning, is this would you call this chanifa? Would you call this flattery, where where you're basically telling the person, oh, look, you did this great job on this thing, and you're kind of trying to throw it in there to ease the tension. What's your thoughts about that? So actually, you know what? Before I put the question out to you, let's just look at the Kli Yakar. So the Kli Yakar defines, and again, the Kli Yakar is one of many. This is a 16th century source. You could have used many other sources. You could have used the Orchos Tzadikim that we did this afternoon. There are many sources that talk about the definition of Hanifa. This is a very succinct definition, which is why it's used. You should not, again. So this is an interesting turn of phrase because again, Hanifa tends to mean mockery, but here you should not do something to the land using a language of mockery, but you're not mocking the land. You're kind of, whatever the mockery is doing something to the land. So again, here translated as corrupt the land, but okay. So the Kli Yakar says, Kohan nosein davar el abeltira uilo. Anybody who gives something who doesn't really deserve it. Kedei shiachzor gamhu, so that person will, right, feel a need to give you now something. Right, gamhu v'yitain lo davar ma zehu nikra chanufa. That's called chanifa. So you give something to someone who doesn't deserve it, knowing full well that by doing so you're gonna get, right, perhaps twofold, fivefold, tenfold back in return. So the Kli Yakar says that is, right, the notion of, right, that you're everything is calculated that you're giving to get. You're giving to get. That is how he translates Hanifa, right? So in the context of flattery per se, it's where you flatter someone, you tell someone, oh, you're so wonderful, as a way of, right, buttering them up for some future something, right? So what are your thoughts about this this Professor Pelt telling Professor Wyman, right, or whoever, I don't know if it was a professor or not, but this Pelt fellow who's representing the college against the union, who's trying to praise Professor Wyman as he's trying to kind of diffuse this union of professors. What do you think of this tactic to bring up this person's work to kind of say, oh, I value your contribution?
I'm going to jump in again. My first reaction is that it's ambiguous because, first of all, I don't know what that household consumption is. My first reaction to it was a twist to get him to get him to acquiesce, not out of flattery, but out of an argument that would undermine his position that he himself had made.
Okay. So the way Professor Levine, sorry, the way Rabbi Levine presents it is, it was meant to just
to definitely be a flattery.
Yeah.
And in that case, I mean, even though it may be a justifiable, I mean, maybe there was really reason to praise him for that. As you say, it's sort of extraneous to the situation, and so it's not germane. And so that in that case, it would seem to be a bit of flattery in order to try to sway for his side.
Okay. Any other thoughts? So Rabbi Levine actually thinks in this case there's actually not a problem. And his basic reasoning is that flattery is, again, where you give something to somebody who does not deserve it, or you do something to somebody who does not deserve it. And so you're doing that in order to get him to do something. But he says, if, let's say, right, this is, you're kind of building rapport. You're kind of trying to, right, say I value as a person, even if it's not necessarily completely on topic. The fact is that it's not a false statement. It's a true statement. It's not deserving. It's in theory it is deserving. And so even if it's not germane, and even if it is a tactic, he's comfortable with it. So you see where he's trying to draw that distinction between the way the Kli Yakar presents chanufa, right, or the concept of chanifa, is where you over the top flatter someone or do something for someone who does not deserve it specifically. And then your goal is, the only reason you're doing that is in order to get something out of it, to pull something out of it. So that's kind of where he starts to see a little bit of a distinction between where the problem would be versus non-problematic situations. Right. So Rabbi Aaron Levine He says, speaking one way while thinking another is prohibited because such conduct sends out a false signal. In the case at hand, no false signal is sent out by the pleasantries held in wine exchange before the bargaining session begins. This is so because each party does not mistakenly take his opposite numbers inquiries about family as gesture fine. So this is also another part of it that deals with kind of how they say hi to each other and how's your family doing and everything else. So the point is, and he kind of lumps these two pieces together. The point is that things that are to be expected in terms of, right, you do research when you're going to have an argument with somebody. You make sure you know where they're holding, and if you're going to give them props for things that you actually believe are things that they deserve props for, that's not out of bounds. That's actually just a part of building rapport with someone that you're having a conversation or debate with. Okay, so yeah.
As far as like the Shemona Esrei, there's a lot of buttering up, but I guess, for the Shemona Esrei, you use sort of the same svara there that Hashem is deserving of it, I guess. So
100%. I think that it's interesting. I will say that part of what's happening in the Shemona Esrei is, right, what we talk about Shemona Esrei as the Hit Palel, to be reflexive. So one of the things that I think is important also, that when we praise God, we're also setting the standard for what we need to be aspiring to. So I think that there's a little bit of a combination of, yes, God does deserve it, it is truthful, and also we end up setting the bar very high for ourselves, because if we are Chelek El Kamimal, we're kind of have this piece of God in us, and right, tefillah is about kind of understanding our inner selves, then to some extent we're setting ourselves up for a very, very high bar, which again is not a bad thing. But yeah, I think it does fit a little bit in terms of we are buttering God up a little bit. Is that not Hanifa? But it's true. So it does fit. Didn't think about it. But yeah, okay. So now I want to kind of talk about another interesting piece of this, which also connects back to that initial case that we talked about, which is concealing information, right? So in that initial case that we talked about, so you had this person who had a certain eye for art, and they didn't share the information that they thought might be possible with the person they were buying the art from. It's not like they said, oh, I think this is a dolly, it might be worth a lot of money, I'll give you $5 for it. They just said, right, how much you selling this for? $10? I have 5. Okay, right, great. So it wasn't that he lied, it was just that he held back certain potential information that he thought might be relevant to why he was looking to buy the situation. Now, this is a slightly different case. Brian Cathcart is a British journalism scholar. He wrote a bunch of books. In 2015, he published a book which talks about Waterloo. And in there, he talks about the Rothschild libel. So again, unfortunately, sometimes you'll see this actually presented as a true story, but many scholars, I think basically all scholars of serious note today, reject the story as a true story, but it's still a story that was told. That in the summer of 1846, a political pamphlet bearing the ominous signature Satan swept across Europe, telling a story which, through lurid and improbable, left a mark that can be seen to this day. So the story that was told was that about 30 years earlier, this is the kind of the legend of how the Rothschilds came to all their money, which was the pamphlet claimed to recount the history of the richest and most famous banking family of the time, the Rothschilds, and its most enduring passage told how their vast fortune was built upon the bloodshed of the Battle of Waterloo, whose bicentennial falls this year in 2015. Again, the Battle of Waterloo was the final battle of the Napoleonic Wars. It was the war in which the British defeated Napoleon and the French army. Now, there was a lot of money at stake in terms of who is going to win the war. And so the way that the legend goes is that the Rothschild had sent a scout to basically watch the war. And if they ever got a good inkling as to who was going to win the war, they should rush back and tell them how it was going to go. So the way the story goes is that they found out that the British were going to win the war. So what they did was they pulled a shticky move and they sold all of their British assets, making it look like the French were about to win the war. Everybody was freaking out. Oh, why are the Rothschilds selling all of their British assets? Must be they think that the British are going to lose, and so everybody sells, and they're basically the market of the British market just plummets because everybody starts to sell, because it's kind of like if Warren Buffett starts selling something, so everyone in the market starts like, well, why is Warren Buffett selling this? I need to sell it too, and it could create a certain spiral in certain areas. So the British market was spiraling down out of control. And when it hit its nadir, the story goes the Rothschilds went back and bought it all at very bottom of the barrel. And then sure enough, the British win the war, and all of the stock they had just bought for a pittance was now bloated and significantly more valuable. That's the way the story goes, which is basically they pulled shtick and manipulated the marketplace, which is basically what hedge funds do every single day today. It's fine. It's not fine, but it's a problematic reality of this is if anyone was following the GameStop or any of those to the moon stocks 5-6 months ago, it was all what this is, certain people would buy stocks ahead of time, and then they would pump up the whole bunch of different people to buy the stocks, and the stock would go up very quickly. The people who had started the process would sell at the height, and then at some point the stock would come crashing down, and they all turned it into, oh, we're going to stick it to the man, going to cause the hedge fund people to lose out because they're all shorting the stock, whatever. Long story for another time, for those who are not following it. But long story short, this non-true story about the Rothschilds, let's assume for a second that it was true, So what do you think about this one? So again, just a reminder. So the Rothschilds decide to, in this fake story, they decide to sell their British assets in order to cause the market to go down. And then once it's down, they rebuy at the bottom, and then everyone finds out the British won, and the stocks go back up. Anybody? Any thoughts?
Well, it's something you're not allowed to do today, but at the time, if you take a look, people did that on commodity exchanges all the time.
Right. So you're saying,
it's not
from a purely legal, secular legal perspective, in theory, it wasn't problematic. In that era, that's possible. I don't know if it.
I mean, it was not right. They didn't have So judging by the time, I don't know what the laws were.
We're gonna see why that matters.
Whether it was a buyer beware.
We'll see why that matters in a little bit. Again, and it's always hard to judge things retrospectively when we're looking back at things, because again, we're judging it based off of but it doesn't seem to pass the sniff test, right? I mean, if it was true, it seems to be. But let's imagine for a second, slightly different case. What would happen if they had found out that the British were going to win, and so they sold off their French assets? What would you say then? Forget the story as the legend has happened. The legend has happened is that they tricked everybody into selling all their British assets, and they bought them all low, and then it all went back up. What happens if they had just found out that based off of their information, that it seems like the British are going to win, so they sold off all their French assets before that conclusion came out, and then their French assets went down the toilet? What about that case?
As long as it's not insider trading, it's not illegal.
And so what makes a difference between insider trading versus non-insider trading?
But one is based on something for fact because you are a part of the decision-making entity. And the other is you've made a supposition based on information that you've gleaned, hopefully through legal ways, And if you've made an analysis that says who's going to win or who's going to lose, and you gain the market based on that, and I don't care if you're selling off French or English, but as long as it's not insider trading itself, but you've done it through legal means of gathering information, I don't see either of those as particularly problematic. They sent a market signal and the markets responded.
Right. So you're okay either way.
Yeah.
Right. So the truth is that, right, you can definitely make that argument. Certainly in the case where where they just got information and they sold off their French assets, 100%, I think in that case, I think you're 100% correct, because as you said so well, they paid someone to get information. They got that information. They used that information to make a decision, and that decision, right, benefited them greatly because they got information early. But it was not insider trading because that information is public knowledge. If somebody else wanted to pay a scout to go look at the war, they could have gotten the same information if they chose. The other case, again, technically, you could make the same argument, but whether or not it passes the sniff test of, right, how manipulative it was or is, I think raises certain eyebrows, and I think that you could make arguments in both directions. I'll leave it there just at this point, but we'll see a couple of very important makoros in this next section that I think will be helpful. Okay, so let's take a look at these makoros. So first, the Gemara in Pesachim, again, this is an Agadata, but still, it's just to show you the power or the problematic reality. Shosha Kadosh Baruch Hu Sonan, there are three that Kadosh Baruch Hu hates, which is a very strong language. Hamidaber Echad Bepeh Ve'echad Belev, someone who speaks one thing by their mouth and another thing from their heart. Ve'odea Eidos Becha. So that's the one that's for us, right? Someone who says one thing but means something else, right? So this is perhaps why, right, the case of the fictitious story that the Rothschilds knew that the British won, but sell off their assets in a way to try to create, right, that downturn in the market, right, is a little bit of you're duping the public. Again, should the public be following the Rothschilds blindly? No, but still, that's part of the sniff test conversation in this context. But what I want to highlight, so that we're going to do two things. First, we're going to do source 8, and then I'm going to go back to source 7, which is a source that requires more study another time as kind of a little bit of the counterweight. But the Rav Shmuel of the Medina, which is the Marshtam, right, is one of the Shelos Chuvos from the 16th century. So he has a very important kind of, I would say, rule of thumb that I found very, very helpful in terms of giving you some basic guidelines. Halacha harveches shekol hanosei v'nosein stam al minhag medina hu somech. The halacha is that anybody who, or the halacha that has spread is that anybody who engages in business practices, nosei v'nosein stam, their general approach is to rely upon the general practices of the place that they find themselves. So what are the general business ethics in the place that you find yourselves? V'im kain, im yisbarer shehaminhag pashut shenosim v'nosnim b'davar zeh b'shebein motziin kesef harbe yoter al shtuso she'az nit'ana hamocher uvein she'ena motziin ela pachos yeser mishtus she'az nit'ana mocher. So there are two cases here in whether. So again, there's a whole parak in Baba Metzia about the concept of ona. Ona is overcharging or overpaying more than a sixth of, which is really 20% based off of Talmudic math, because it's a sixth after you, right? Whatever. It's really a fifth, but it's called a sixth. But 20% of the value. If you overpay or underpay more than a sixth of the market value of any given product, that's a problem for the charger and for the payer. In both directions, it's a problem according to the Gemara, and how you calculate ona. It's a very complicated parak. Nevertheless, says the Marshdam, if it's clear that the general practice in a place is that you do business, and there are times where you pay more than a sixth or less than a sixth, more than 20% of the value up or down, and that's the normal reality on the grounds. You can't go to a court and say, oh, you overcharged me more than the going price by 20%, and therefore please intervene. Right? You have to assume, unless otherwise indicated, that both players are working within the system that they find themselves, and therefore they're doing this with full knowledge, and they can't later come back and say, oh, right? No, we assume that they forgave each other. They basically said, I'm okay either way, and therefore there is no concept of huna. Now, this framework of using the business practices that are accepted of your time, again, it's kind of an outcrop of dina de malchuta dina, right? The law of the land is the law, but this framework is super helpful for us in terms of trying to understand, again, some of these cases. So this would mean things like, if there's an assumption that people have conversations with each other and they may say even nice things about each other, assuming they're true, right? So these things would not be bad business practices. In terms of bargaining, if the normal assumption is that there's going to be some bargaining that happens, that's totally fine. If the assumption is that if information is out there and you can get it and I can get it and I choose to get it and you don't choose to get it, that I can benefit from that, that seems to be fine. And that seems to be the general rule of the Marashtam, is that general business practices is the way to kind of analyze any given situation. It's when you introduce lying, it's when you introduce echad b'pev, echad b'leiv, right? One thing in your heart, one thing in your head. It's where you introduce things that don't necessarily pass the sniff test of, is this really right according to not what people necessarily, it's not, when I say business practices that are common, I mean meaning business practices that everybody agrees are ethical, not unethical things that lots of people do, right? That's not how you define what's right. It's things that are, right, most people would consider this to be an ethical approach to a given situation. So that framework, it seems to be the way with which many poskim deal with these issues in the kind of the business world. Now, if you backtrack for a second, this Gemara in Ksubas Tzadei Zayin Amid Aleph, so this Gemara requires a lot more study, but it's a very interesting case. So Hahu Bitzrusa Dahava B'Nerda. So there was a famine in the area of Nerda, which again was an area where many rabbis, Talmudic scholars from the Talmud lived. Zavniu Kuli Alma Lav Dinhu. So many people were worried that because of the famine, that there was going to be great inflation on food, and that people were going to require lots of money in order to, acquire food. And so people, in realizing this problem, began to sell their homes to get liquid cash so they would be able to acquire food to make it through the famine. L'sof asuchiti. But in the end, the prognostication of famine was wrong because the deliveries made it there on time. So in the end, there was plenty of food, and now everyone had sold their houses. So Amar lahu Rav Nachman declared, Dima hu dahadari afadni l'marayu, that anybody who purchased houses during this time has to return it to their owners, meaning get the money back and basically undo the sale. Now, the truth is, right, is that there was that no one had full information in this case, right? People didn't realize that the chiti was going to get there, but they made an assessment, a risk assessment for themselves and their families, and it turned out they were wrong, right? So why does Rav Nachman tell everybody that they have to return, any buyers, they have to return the houses? It's something that requires a little bit more insight in terms of trying to figure out what went wrong in this case that gave Rav Nachman the right or the ability to reverse all those sales. Also, is this Rav Nachman acting within the realm of din or within the realm of right what makes sense for tzibor in a particular case, right? Meaning, is this din or is this above and beyond, right? What exactly is the impetus here? This Gemara requires a lot more study, but it's too beyond our ability to cover tonight. But I didn't want to overlook it. I wanted to bring it to light. And this Tosfos kind of cuts in the opposite direction. So Tosfos in Ksubos, this is in 47b or Mem Zayin Amud Beis. So Tosfos says the following about a transaction between two parties. So Im Tamar, so the case is that you buy a cow from your friend, and the cow drops dead soon thereafter, but not for any reason that was able to be seen, right? Anybody who buys a cow from their friend and the cow dies within the year, Omesa, right? So, or sorry, it gets torn apart, or it dies, but again, not because of anything that you could have known was going to happen. So we all can testify, and we all know that the buyer didn't buy it, wouldn't have bought it if he would have known for sure that this would have happened. But Tosfos responds, but you could make the opposite anan sahade. Anan sahade is basically like you don't have actual witnesses, but it's likely, it's such a glaringly obvious, right, possibility that it's like we have witnesses to the reverse, which is that even if this happens to the cow, the reality is that every, let's say, 1 million cows that are bought are going to die within the year, even though there was no indication they were going to die within the year, or they're going to get eaten by some wild beast, even though you had no idea it was going to. Every certain percentage is that going to happen, and yet you still go into the act of buying cows because you know that 999 of the cows that you acquire are going to work out, right? So you still want the right. You're by buying this, you're willing and interested in taking on that risk. And therefore, right, so this Tosfos in many ways cuts against the Gemara, right? When you sold your house for the food, in some ways, right, you would argue that you were accepting a certain risk when you sold your house for the inflationary situation for the food, and that should be right understood. But okay, so either way, the point is that generally speaking, when you have a situation that doesn't turn out in the ideal way, if you had no information beforehand that it was going to turn out that way, and the buyer and the seller both right kind of make the deal is done because nobody had any inside information here. It's just sometimes unlucky things happen to you, and it is what it is. Yes, David.
So, Rabbi, so what happens in the situation that we're going to be reading about in the Chumash soon with Yosef? He buys all the land of the Egyptians, except
very
for the
good, very good.
Kohanim, turns it over to Paro, and the famine only lasts 2 years because after Yaakov comes down, no more famine.
Yeah, no, Yosef makes out like a banshee, right?
Paro does like a bandit.
Yes.
Because
Paro,
but the famine only lasted 2 years, right? We
Yeah.
say that it doesn't last the full 7 years.
right, and the reality is that no one makes Yosef return all the land. Now again,
Right.
right? So exactly how you put those two cases. I mean, I think that case.
I know they're not exactly true.
But still, I think that case does cut against. It's more like this Tosfos, which is basically you assume certain risk when you live a certain way, and it wasn't like Yosef's prophecy to Paro was a secret. It wasn't like he just told Paro. It was announced in the right? A lot of people didn't take that information and use it the way they lived. They didn't live their life based off of that information. They just kind of went about their day. And then when it all happened, it was kind of like, oh, now I'm stuck. But yeah, no, it's a great parallel case. It's a great parallel case. Fine. So interestingly, so this Mishnah in the Nedarim is also super helpful for talking about what happens when, right, it's what I would call part of the game, right, or part of the assumed way that these things work. So the Mishnah in Nedarim says Nidre Ziruzin Ketzad. So vows of goading, right? So you're being mizares, you're causing someone to basically up their ante, right? Through vows, right? It kind of reminds me of, right, in certain shuls where you have bidding wars for different kibudim, different points, right? So that's what a nidre ziruzin are, right? Where you're, right? So here it's actually, instead of it being a bidding war up, it's basically a bidding war between, right, two parties. Right, I'm selling this thing, and you say, right, I may this thing be consecrated no less than a sela, meaning I'm not selling this for any less than a sela, right? Valo Omer, and the other one, Hala Omer, and the other one says, Kodam she'eni mosif lecha al hashekel, and the other one says, well, I'm not paying you any more than a shekel, right? And Shneim rotzin b'shlosha dinarin, but both of them really wanted the in-between price between a shekel and a sela, which is 3 dinarin. So basically, this is a classic negotiation, right? One guy asks for a higher price, the other guy says a lower price, but both of them had every intention of ending the conversation in between, right? So this is actually viewed in many of the, right, the Achronim's Svarim about this conversation, right? This notion is very much the source for bargaining, right, that we see even in the very beginning, even though it's not direct bargaining, they're bargaining by, right, talking about what vows they're gonna, right, how much vows they would be willing to do or give this item for. The point is that, right, that part of the process of getting to a certain price. And so in many cases where, right, that's the only problem is is bargaining even okay, where you say, oh, I'll pay you this, you pay this, you handle, no, I'll give you a little bit less. So the point is that the notion of one person asking for more and one person asking for less, so they can end somewhere in between, again, using the framework of the Shut Marish Dam, right, that this is the basic assumption is that this is how these things go, is if it's all part of, again, of that system of how it works, it seems like there is what to say that makes it okay. Yes, Fred, what's up?
So 3 things. One, the bowing seems to be an issue to me. That why, that we're told not to make vows.
100%. So again, it's not, they're not actually, right,
They're
not actually making a vow. They're basically saying that I would make a vow that I'm not going to go any less than, right? It's kind of like
hedging, but hedging, not really.
It's using, I would say, exuberant language to make a point about a price point. That's really what's happening in the Mishnah. But agreed. Honestly, the whole concept of Nedarim for us is a foreign one, because we basically just try to bli neder everything, and we culminate everything, and we kind of annul our vows at the beginning of the year, then we annul our vows for next year, we annul our vows, and we try to say, no, we don't ever take vows. I mean, we try to just stay away from the whole thing. There is the whole debate in the Gemara whether it's better to never vow or better to vow and keep your vow, right? Everyone agrees that vowing and not keeping your vow is bad. So, right, so the issue is whether it's better to vow and keep your vow or better not to vow at all. So,
and then,
yeah,
and going back a little bit further to David's point about Yosef, that brings to mind Jonah. That Jonah was, in terms of not wanting to go to Nineveh to speak the prophecy, because he expected that then they would repent and so that sort of goes back to the Osaf with buying up the property, and that the famine ends early, so that they're that the divine decree is out of our hands. We go by what we're told. He prophesies based upon Pharaoh's dreams that there would be 7 years, and so and so that was what everybody was acting upon. The basic information, which actually goes back to the Napoleonic thing a little bit too, I think. And then in also going back to in terms of the cow, that I think I lost track of what I was going to say on that, but that there was I'll just skip that for now.
Okay. Right, and so this Gemara just explained this Mishnah. Mitchila kishinodru na yerotzim gimel. That's right, gimel elu shayu v'anansa de dedatem lekach hilkach lav neder hu klal. Right, because their intention was always that they wanted to get out 3 dinrin, and they were just using this language as a way of to again goad each other, convince each other to go in for the price they were looking for. Right now, I'm not going higher than this. I'm not going lower than this. So it was all in terms of trying to get to the same price. So therefore, we don't actually consider it a vow. That's to your point, Fred. So again, it sounds like a vow. It's weird, but to me, it's almost like it's like a hyperbole of sorts to try to move the sale along. Yeah. Last source that I want to just address, and then we'll wrap up some of the takeaways, is the Gemara Bava Metzia, Daf Pei Amud Aleph 80a. So the Gemara here says, "Amocher par lechavero," someone who sells a cow to their friend. Va'amar lo parazu nigachisi nishchanisi batanisi revsanisi laheba mum echad v'sinfu bo hamumin. So let's say, right, you have a whole bunch. You claim that this cow that you're selling has a whole bunch of these issues. Right? It has a whole bunch of issues, but really, it has only one of these issues, but it's really bad, right? So it's really goring a lot of things. So it's really like a really bad gore, but you present it as like, yeah, just a little bit of goring and a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, right? So you kind of, right? So imagine, for instance, like you have a car that you're selling, right? And you say, right, like, so, okay, it's got a little ding here, and like the air conditioning doesn't really work, and right, the engine is failing, and whatever, and it's got a couple little problems, right? But the reality is that like the engine's not working, right? Again, the person could probably check it, but the point is that you just kind of put in a whole bunch of, let's say, lesser or not quite as extreme issues as a way of hiding this one glaring issue that it has that really stands out and is really kind of above and beyond. We still call that harei ze mechartos. Mum ze umum acher ein ze mechartos. But if you say, no, it has this mum, and then you say, oh, it also has this mum, right? You don't kind of have a long list where you're trying to hide the real problem amongst a list of small things, but you actually highlight each one, so then it's fine, right? So if you say, oh yeah, the engine doesn't work, and you try and turn the car and it doesn't really turn on, right? And the air doesn't really work, and you try to turn the air and it doesn't really work, right? So then if you highlight each one, so then that's okay. But if you're trying to hide the information within a list of minor things to try to obfuscate, that is also, right, a little bit problematic. So again, the basic approach, and again, like I said, this class is painting with broad brushes, but the basic approach that the poskim seem to base off of a lot of these makoros is that you're kind of at the mercy for the ethical business practices of the time and the assumptions that people make when they engage in, right, common business practice, right? They're just going to do what's normal. Again, that's assuming there's no lying, there's no attempt to obfuscate, there's no attempt to hide the facts, there's no attempt to hide the ball, right? That you're not trying to hide. Again, if you spent the time or spent the money to get information ahead of time in a legal manner, and you're more educated and you spent time to become more educated, you can withhold that information. But if you mislead, right, purposefully mislead people in the process, that's where all of a sudden things become more problematic. If you, again, say something that's completely not true in order to get somebody to do something, that is the definition of chanifa. That's the definition of an inappropriate type of flattery. But if you, in normal conversation, right, highlight that you value this person and you value the contributions in different areas, and that's a part of building rapport with the person that you're perhaps debating or, right, trying to, right, defend in a court case. So there, again, it seems like we're okay with that because that is accepted practice, and it's not meant to be creating a lie. It's not meant to, and again, obviously there's gray areas, there's issues, there's things where it gets a little bit more complicated, but this is, right, a basic approach that you're going to find, and that Rabbi Levine in his book highlights in different ways, that as long as you're echad b'pedach believe, you're one in your heart, you're one in your mouth, you're trying to do, right, your best, and you're trying to be honest in the context, then that is a solid approach to bargaining, to flattery, and how to appropriately do business in the modern age. I'll stop for any thoughts or questions.
Going back to the cow, I remembered what my train of thought was on that. That it seemed to me that the question of whether there was a existing condition to the cow versus it being slain by a wild animal would really be two different things.
100%. So if it was known, and or kind of knowable, right, the case is where either the animal is slain by an animal or something, right, it has an aneurysm, right, something happens that you could not have known that something was going to happen within the year that it was going to die, then that's going to be in the same category. But if it, let's say, right, you knew that it had a hole in its lung, right, and you knew that it got attacked by a wolf, and the wolf took like a chunk out of it, and like, okay, he was able to hide it a little bit, and you didn't divulge that information, so then it's a little more complicated. Then you knew that information, you hid that information, however you hid it, and that would be more problematic. The point, though, is that there was no way of knowing the animal was going to die within the year. There was no indication of such.
No, but it still seems to me that they should be separated, because I guess you're right, but because if it's unknown to both parties, then it's happenstance just as well as it might be with a wild animal. Okay, all right, I can understand that. Thank you.
Right. It's still one is still an internal thing versus a totally external thing, but the point is that it's not because of an obfuscation or a hiding the ball or right, information that you're not divulging. It's right. It's not that I know I have a lemon and I'm trying to pawn it off to you. It's that this was a perfectly healthy cow yesterday. I sold the cow to you today, and the cow dropped dead tomorrow. And there was no way that any of us would have known that was going to happen. It's really tough luck on you, but it's your cow. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Okie doke. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. We'll see if this is a one-off or if we do more things in this realm. But for now we'll leave it here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Be well.